Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ here. Welcome to the program. On tonight's headlines.
Indonesian divers search waters off Jakarta for black boxes from a passenger jet that crashed at the weekend with 62 people aboard, as investigators took up the grim task of identifying victims' remains.
U.S. Democrats say they will push to remove President Donald Trump from office during the final days of his administration after his supporters' violent attack on the Capitol.
It's the world's most pressing scientific puzzle, but experts are warning there may never be conclusive answers over the source of the coronavirus after an investigative effort marked from the start by disarray, Chinese secrecy, and international rancor, according to analysts.
And young adults dressed to the nines in kimonos gather in the city of Kawasaki to celebrate reaching the age of majority, although many of the usually jubilant events were cancelled over coronavirus fears.
Body parts, twisted wreckage, and clothing were plucked from waters off the Indonesian capital after a passenger jet with 62 people aboard crashed shortly after takeoff a day earlier. Authorities have yet to say why the Sriwijaya Air Boeing 737-500 went into a steep dive about 4 minutes after it left Soekarno-Hatta International Airport on Saturday afternoon. But on Sunday, they said that they had pinpointed the location of its black boxes, cockpit voice, and flight data recorders that could be key to explaining why the plane slammed into the Java Sea off the sprawling city's coast. Take a look.
Teman-teman dari TNI dan Basarnas, termasuk stakeholder TNI dan Polri, juga saat ini terus berupaya untuk mendapatkan black box yang posisinya juga diduga kuat adalah posisi black box yang kita cari. Dua sinyal yang dikeluarkan oleh black box tersebut terus bisa dipantau dan sekarang sudah kita beri marking. Mudah-mudahan dalam waktu yang tidak terulang black box tersebut bisa kita angkat sehingga sebagai bahan KNKT untuk mengetahui penyebab terjadinya kecelakaan besar dari bawah. Mudah-mudahan berkat doa dari seluruh masyarakat Indonesia, rencana pengangkatan potongan-potongan pesawat yang saat ini ada di kedalaman kurang lebih 23 meter bisa segera diangkat.
Data from Flight Radar 24 indicated that the airliner reached an altitude of nearly 11,000 feet before dropping suddenly to 250 feet. It then lost contact with air traffic control. The transport minister's bags filled with human remains as well as debris from the wreckage in waters about 23 meters deep. DNA from relatives will be compared with discovered remains for identification. All 62 passengers and crew aboard the half-full flight were Indonesian. The count includes the 26-year-old plane, which was previously flown by U.S.-based Continental Airlines and United Airlines. The Indonesian carrier has not recorded a fatal crash since it started operations in 2003, but this accident is the latest in a string of disasters for the country's aviation sector.
U.S. Democrats said Sunday they would push to remove President Donald Trump from office during the final days of his administration after his supporters' violent attack on the Capitol, with some Republicans supporting the move. House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the top Democrat in Congress, said there would be a resolution on Monday calling for the cabinet to remove Trump as unfit for office under the Constitution's 25th Amendment. Watch this.
What if he pardons himself?
What if he pardons these people who are terrorists on the Capitol?
Or pardons himself?
He can only pardon himself from federal offenses. He cannot pardon himself from state offenses, and that's where he's being investigated in the state of New York.
There is a possibility that after all of this, there's no punishment, no consequence, and he could run again for president.
And that's one of the motivations that people have for advocating for impeachment.
Won't that take more than the 10 days? I mean, does it actually make sense?
Well, I like the 25th Amendment because it gets rid of him. He's out of office. But there is strong support in the Congress for impeaching the president a second time.
One reason Democrats might pursue conviction even after Trump leaves office is to prevent him from ever being able to run again for federal office. Trump was already impeached once by the Democratic-controlled House in December 2019 for pressuring the Ukrainian president to dig up political dirt on Biden. He was acquitted by the Republican majority Senate. Though time is running short, Democrats likely have the votes in the House to impeach Trump again and could draw increased Republican support for the move. But they are unlikely to muster the two-thirds majority needed to convict Trump in the 100-member Senate and remove him from office. The article of impeachment is set to charge Trump with inciting Wednesday's violence, which left 5 people dead. Hundreds of off-duty police on Sunday lined Constitution Avenue in Washington and saluted a hearse rolled slowly by carrying the body of Brian Sicknick, the police officer who died in the attack on the Capitol. Capitol security has been stepped up with a 7-foot-tall black metal fence erected around the historic building. Extremists have threatened new action in coming days, both in Washington and state capitals.
An impeachment without a conviction or without a conviction before he leaves office would be largely symbolic, according to Brian C. Cult, a professor of constitutional law at Michigan State University who specializes in impeachment, the 25th Amendment, and election controversies. But Professor Cult adds it's still possible that President Trump could be convicted after he leaves office, which could disqualify him from running for president again. Let's listen in.
There's no official timeline, so it's unclear how fast they could make it go if they wanted to. But there are some parliamentary procedures that the House could use to start and end this in a matter of hours if they wanted, but certainly in a day or two. Of course, this would stifle debate and might lead to criticism. And the main issue is not on the House side, it's on the Senate side. The Senate is not around. They're not scheduled to come back until the 19th. And so there's really nothing forcing them to do anything quicker than that. And a trial, again, if they wanted, they could rush it through, but they would not want to do that, neither side. An impeachment without a conviction or without a conviction before he leaves office would be largely symbolic. But even after he's left office, there is the possibility, if they convict him, of the disqualification remedy. Without that, though, without a conviction, they can't really do anything. And as we saw last year, impeaching a president and not convicting him has no effect on his powers at all. It seems counterintuitive that you could impeach and remove someone if they're not in office anymore, and removal seems to be the main point of impeachment. However, looking at the history, there is a history of what I call late impeachment. At the time the Constitution was drafted, there was an ongoing impeachment case in Britain that everyone was aware of Warren Hastings, who was not in office at the time. Now, the disqualification remedy, more generally, disqualifies the convicted person from holding an office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. That's the phrase the Constitution uses. And that clearly includes appointed office in the executive branch, so being in the cabinet or being an ambassador, it would disqualify him from that. The big question is whether the presidency is covered by this. And the general view is that it is, but there are some people who argue that it's not, that basically any elected office established by the Constitution is not covered by this because we want to leave things up to the voters. So if he were impeached and convicted and disqualified, there would be a powerful argument that he'd be unable to run for president ever again.
It is the world's most pressing scientific puzzle, but experts warn there may never be conclusive answers over the source of the coronavirus after an investigative effort marked from the start by disarray, Chinese secrecy, and international rancor. Two experts on virus outbreaks spoke about how feasible it is to work out the origins of the virus that has taken the lives of millions around the world. Watch this.
The value of knowing the source was if we could have looked at that point and said, is it some farmed animals that are being brought in? You could have controlled that. You could have culled out those animals, quarantined everyone associated with that farm, with the market, with the wildlife trade, every patient, and you could have controlled it, and maybe it wouldn't have got out of China. New diseases tend to come from wildlife or animals, livestock, and then infect people. But veterinarians are rarely involved in the outbreak investigation team. It's usually medical staff that go in, and they do a cleanup. And their major focus is getting every patient, getting them into hospital, treating them, and contact tracing. They're much less interested in finding out which animal had it. And what you see with the data that China collected is they didn't do a great job on the animal investigation early on. And I'm sure we'll get there. I'm confident we will eventually find out the bat species that it came from and the likely pathway. We'll never know for sure, but we'll have really good evidence, I'm sure of it.
So the mathematical thing is that the more targets, the more bodies, human or otherwise, that a virus infects and passages through, the more the statistical random chance that it's going to acquire the mutations that will allow it to become highly contagious. In the story about this virus just coming out of the seafood market in Wuhan in December, it's just not plausible whatsoever. It'll happen again soon. But I don't believe that's what happened. I believe that it occurred naturally from some animal without human intervention and modification or engineering. It occurred naturally, but it had to have been many months earlier, and perhaps a year, I don't know, perhaps more than a year.
10 World Health Organization scientists will visit China from Thursday to probe the origins of COVID-19, according to authorities today, more than a year after the pandemic began, and amid accusations Beijing has tried to thwart the investigation. The long-awaited mission is of great political significance at a time when the coronavirus pandemic has devastated the world, caused almost 2 million deaths, and brought the global economy to a virtual standstill. The WHO team, quote, will conduct joint research cooperation on the origins of COVID-19 with Chinese scientists, the National Health Commission said in a statement that provided no further details. A last-minute delay to the mission earlier this month earned China a rare rebuke from the head of the WHO. Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said he was very disappointed China had not authorized the team's entry, especially as 2 members were already en route. Beijing sought to downplay the tension, however, with Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying calling it a misunderstanding. The WHO experts will have to quarantine for 2 weeks on arrival, but are expected later to visit Wuhan, the city where the deadly virus was first detected in late 2019.
Meanwhile, Indonesia's Food and Drug Agency on Monday granted emergency use approval to a COVID-19 vaccine developed by China's Sinovac Biotech. Indonesia became the first country outside China to give the regulatory green light to the vaccine. Interim data from a late-stage human test in Indonesia showed the shot was 65.3% effective. Penny K. Lukito, who heads the country's Food and Drugs Authority, BPOM, said. A Brazil-based trial showed last week that Sinovac's vaccine candidate is 78% effective, while Turkish researchers said in December the vaccine showed 91.25% efficacy based on interim analysis. Indonesia is struggling with the worst COVID-19 outbreak in Southeast Asia. It has reported 836,718 COVID-19 infections and 24,343 deaths. Indonesia has received 3 million doses of Sinovac's vaccine, named CoronaVac, and is slated to receive some 122.5 million more that will come in bulks.
In Malaysia, Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin announced fresh nationwide movement restrictions to curb the soaring number of infections. According to the Straits Times, 6 states, namely Malacca, Johor, Penang, Selangor, Sabah, and the Federal Territories, including Kuala Lumpur, will re-enter the Movement Control Order, or MCO, where social activities and gatherings are banned. The states of Pahang, Perak, Negeri, Sembilan, Kedah, Terengganu, and Kelantan will be placed under a less stringent recovery phase of the MCO. Health Director General Nur Hisham Abdullah said he was particularly worried about the high number of deaths in recent weeks. Since January 1, there have been 71 fatalities. 2 cabinet members also tested positive for the disease over the weekend. Malaysia has reported a record number of cases on several occasions since the third wave of coronavirus infections began to sweep across the country in September. The latest surge in infections was blamed on the political campaigners who returned from Sabah State after a 2-week campaign for the September 26 state election, bringing with them the disease that caused a spike in infections across the peninsula. The soaring cases are also taking a toll on Malaysia's frontline workers. In December, the Health Ministry said a total of 1,771 healthcare workers, a majority of them were nurses, had been infected by COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic. 2/3 of those cases were reported in the third wave of the infections.
Meanwhile, Thai health workers tackle a new wave of COVID-19, hopeful that the country's outbreak is slowing down. Since late December, the total number of cases in the country has doubled to more than 10,000.
So since the new wave of COVID-19 outbreak in Bangkok, we are receiving much more people from our regular number. So we have to start it to have a quota for each day. Right now, our quota is 400 people per day. And we divided the testing into doing swab for RT-PCR and also rapid test from finger prick blood. So in the beginning of the outbreak, since our first wave in Thailand, we started off with no negative pressure room, but just we were wearing just PPE in a really hot climate. But after that, we were kind enough to have a donation from private sectors. We got donated this negative pressure room, so the staffs would not have to be wearing PPE. In this past few days, we are starting to see, a stable number of people infected per day, 100, 200 per day. So hopefully, it would stay like that and the number would come down, hopefully in this few weeks.
Thailand reported 249 new coronavirus cases today, bringing the total number of infections to 10,547 since it detected its first case almost a year ago. The tally included 25 cases imported from abroad, according to the country's COVID-19 task force. There were no new deaths reported. Thailand has recorded 67 coronavirus-related fatalities so far.
Meanwhile, the Philippines has secured 30 million doses of a COVID-19 vaccine developed by U.S. drug maker Novavax, according to officials on Sunday, as the country braces for a surge in infections after a huge Catholic religious event. This is only the second vaccine deal signed by the national government, which has faced growing criticism for its slowness in procuring jabs for the archipelago, where nearly 500,000 infections have been recorded. It hopes to secure 148 million doses this year from 7 companies, enough for around 70% of its population. But the government has warned it will depend on global supply. In an agreement with the Serum Institute of India, or SII, the world's largest vaccine maker, the Philippines will buy 30 million doses of the jab developed by Novavax, the government's vaccine task force said in a statement. The price has not been finalized, but the vaccine will be available from the third quarter. The Novavax vaccine is in late-stage human trials in the United States, Mexico, and Britain, and is, quote, expected to be approved for use by international regulators.
Britain on Saturday said it had recorded over 3 million coronavirus cases since the pandemic began last year, after the government announced another 59,937 new cases. The country also recorded another 1,035 fatalities from the virus, taking the total death toll to 80,868, one of the highest in Europe alongside Italy. Every adult in Britain will have been offered a coronavirus vaccination by the autumn, Health Secretary Matt Hancock said Sunday in the UK's biggest ever inoculation campaign. Hancock said public health officials are currently vaccinating 200,000 people daily as they race to meet a target of inoculating 15 million of the most vulnerable by mid-February. The government is initially prioritizing the elderly, their carers, and health workers, but the health secretary insisted everybody eligible would be offered the jab this year. British health regulators have so far approved 2 vaccines, the Pfizer-BioNTech and Oxford-AstraZeneca jabs, which are already being administered. This week, they also approved U.S. firm Moderna's inoculation, and it will be rolled out from the spring.
And Russia announced Monday that 1.5 million people around the world had received its Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine as part of an initiative Kremlin critics have described as a geopolitical push. The Russian Direct Investment Fund, or RDIF, which has financed the development of the Sputnik V coronavirus vaccine, confirmed the figure to AFP without offering a breakdown of where the jab was distributed. Russia became the first country last August to register a vaccine months ahead of Western competitors, and Moscow has boasted of more than 1 billion orders for the jab abroad. Health Minister Mikhail Murashko said this month that more than 800,000 Russians had received Sputnik and that 1.5 million doses had been distributed throughout the country of around 147 million.
The remote Pacific nation of Micronesia recorded its first case of COVID-19 today, ending its run as one of the few places on Earth without the coronavirus. President David Panuelo said the positive test came from a crewman on a government ship, Chief Milo, which had been in the Philippines undergoing repairs. He said the man and his colleagues remained on the vessel, which was anchored in a lagoon under round-the-clock surveillance. Far-flung Pacific Island nations Philippines have been among the most successful in the world at keeping out the virus after closing their borders early in response to the threat, despite the huge cost to tourism-reliant economies. Vanuatu, the Solomon Islands, the Marshall Islands, Samoa, and now Micronesia have lost their virus-free status, although none have so far reported community transmission. The island nations and territories of Kiribati, Nauru, Palau, Tonga, and Tuvalu are believed to still be free of the coronavirus.
We'll take a short break. Eagle News, we'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by Canreef Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
North Korea leader Kim Jong-un has had his official party title changed, according to state media today, assuming a position previously held by his late father in what analysts said was a move to bolster his authority. The ruling Workers' Party of Korea unanimously adopted a decision to elect Kim as General Secretary at its Congress on Sunday, according to the official KCNA news agency. The new title comes after Kim pledged at the meeting to strengthen his nuclear-armed nation's military capabilities and called the U.S. his country's foremost principal enemy. He also admitted that almost all sectors fell a long way short of the set objectives in North Korea's previous economic plan. Experts said the new nomenclature was largely symbolic, with the Congress changing job titles to reinstate a previously scrapped party secretariat system. The North Korean economy is also struggling in the face of self-imposed coronavirus isolation and is subject to multiple sanctions over its banned nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. At the same time, nuclear talks with the U.S. have been deadlocked since the collapse of the Hanoi summit between Kim and President Donald Trump in February of 2019.
Meanwhile, Foreign Minister Joseph Wu unveiled on Monday a newly designed and more identifiable Taiwan passport seeking clearer distinction from China. The passport, which has a newly designed cover, was formally introduced on Monday, 4 months after Wu first unveiled the new design in September 2020. The newly designed passport cover significantly reduces the size of the words Republic of China, which is the formal designation of Taiwan, and places them inside a narrow circle that goes around the national emblem. In contrast, the word Taiwan is magnified, printed in a bold font and prominently located based on the sample passport. The move is likely to anger China, which regards Taiwan as a renegade province awaiting unification by force if necessary.
In other news, at least 11 people were killed, including a 6-year-old boy. The disaster on Saturday.
In other news, schools, courts, and museums were closed throughout central Spain on Monday, 2 days after the region was hit with a massive snowstorm. Officials have asked people to stay at home if possible after Storm Filomena brought the heaviest snowfall in the region for 50 years, killing 3 people. Emergency services and Army snowplows worked round the clock on Friday and Saturday to free some 2,500 drivers trapped in their vehicles. The Army also had to clear the snow from Madrid airport, with some flights resuming on Sunday. However, by Monday morning in Madrid, only main roads had been cleared of snow, with most pavements, smaller roads and residential areas still covered. Residents heeded the government's call to stay at home, with the capital streets all but deserted. Throughout the weekend, people had been responding to calls to help clear vital paths in their neighborhoods to allow access to hospitals.
The unemployment rate in Spain in 2020 grew 23% as a result of business restrictions imposed to curb the coronavirus pandemic. Here's Beverly Madrid joining us live from Spain. Hello, Beverly.
Hello, Alma. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yes. Spain jobless grew by 23% in 2020. According to the government figures shown recently, the number of recorded unemployed people in Spain leaped by almost 23% in the year 2020, as it suffered one of the devastating economic blows from the coronavirus pandemic. The Labor Ministry also stated that the number of jobless people increased to 724,532 from the registered 3,888,137 people out of work a year earlier. There were an additional 36,825 unemployed registered in December alone. The number of furloughed employees reached the number of 755,000 by the end of 2020, and this government scheme is set to stay the same until the end of January 2021. The unemployment rate rose to a total of 360,000 during the course of the pandemic in 2020, when the number of people making Social Security contribution was taken into account. According to Lorenzo Amor, the deputy head of the Spanish Confederation of Employers Organizations, or CEOE, that year 2020 ended as a dreadful year for employment, and he also called on the government to extend its ERTE, or furlough scheme, which has already been renewed twice. Union leaders say the furlough scheme has been crucial, according to Unai Sordo, General Secretary of the Workers' Commissions, and he admitted that without the furlough scheme and other safeguards, there could be another 2 million unemployed. But the scheme has cost the public fund a huge sum, adding to the expanding public deficit and debt in Spain, which had gained an impressive recovery in recent years from the devastation caused by the financial crisis in 2008. Spain is predicted to show the biggest economic collapse among Western economies this year, with only 12.8% IMF growth, as it only depends heavily on tourism. Back to you, Alma.
Yes, Beverly. Aside from unemployment, what is another example of labor challenges many workers there in Spain face?
You know, Alma, it's interesting that despite the furlough scheme the Spanish government has implemented since the pandemic crisis, a huge number of employees still await their furlough payments, and some workers who were suspended from their jobs during the lockdown still haven't received their monthly salary owed by their employers, and they have been waiting since March last year. And so it's really devastating for the employees here in Spain, especially to young people and women who are particularly vulnerable to the economic fallout during the pandemic.
All right. Thank you very much, Beverly, for your updates there in Spain. Looking forward to more updates coming out of there. Take care. Take care. It's extreme weather right now.
Yes. Thank you, Alma. Stay safe. Reporting from Barcelona, Spain, I'm Beverly Madrid. We live in interesting times.
China threatened a counter-strike against a move by the United States to lift restrictions on official contacts with Taiwan as military tensions grow between Beijing and the self-ruled island. Watch this.
任何损害中国核心利益的行径，都将遭到中方坚决回击，也不可能得逞。
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Saturday Washington would lift complex internal restrictions on contacts with Taipei by diplomats after a year of mounting U.S.-Chinese friction on topics including human rights, trade, and the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. Beijing says Taiwan is an inviolable part of China to be reclaimed by force if necessary and opposes any diplomatic recognition of the democratic island. It was not clear what the change means in practice, with Pompeo saying executive branch communications with Taiwan will be handled by the American Institute in Taiwan, which is owned by the U.S. government and serves as the de facto embassy. The AIT was founded in 1979 when the United States extended diplomatic recognition to mainland China under a historic agreement requiring it to end formal recognition of Taiwan. But Washington remains a staunch ally of Taipei and is bound by Congress to sell its weapons for self-defense. It opposes any move to change Taiwan's current status by force.
And we're still following developments of the Indonesian plane crash. The crew of the Indonesian passenger jet that crashed off Jakarta at the weekend with 62 people aboard did not declare an emergency or report technical problems before it suddenly plunged into the sea, according to an investigator on Monday. So far, inspectors have been unable to say why the 26-year-old plane crashed just 4 minutes after takeoff, but they do know the location of the black boxes. A recording of conversations with air traffic control pointed to routine exchanges, and there was no communication as the Sriwijaya Air Boeing 737-500 plunged about 10,000 feet in less than a minute before slamming into the Java Sea, according to National Transportation Safety Committee investigator Nurkaiko Utomo. There were 62 Indonesian passengers, and Indonesians goes by one name, was a former Air Force pilot with decades of flying under his belt, according to local media. Some of the 2,600 personnel working in the recovery effort, involving dozens of boats and helicopters, are hauling body parts, twisted piece of wreckage, and passengers' clothing. Aviation analysts said flight tracking data showed the plane sharply deviated from its intended course before it went into a steep dive, with bad weather, pilot error, and mechanical malfunction among the potential factors. Sriwijaya Air, which flies to destinations in Indonesia and Southeast Asia, has said little about the plane, which was previously flown by U.S.-based Continental Airlines and United Airlines.
7 staff at one of Pakistan's biggest power plants have been suspended after a technical fault sparked a massive grid breakdown at the weekend, plunging the entire country into darkness. The blackout hit all of Pakistan's major cities, including the capital Islamabad, economic hub Karachi, and the second largest city, Lahore, lasting around 18 hours in most areas. The employees at Gudu Thermal Power Plant in Sindh province were suspended on account of the negligence of duty, according to the Central Power Generation Company, which operates the facility. Gudu plant, built in the 1980s, is one of the country's largest and generates power from furnace oil and natural gas. The suspended staff included a manager and 6 junior employees. The blackout, which started shortly before midnight on Saturday, was caused by an engineering fault which tripped the system and caused power plants across the country to shut down. Pakistan's electricity supply system is a complex and delicate web, and a problem in one section of the grid can lead to cascading breakdowns countrywide. There were no reports of disruption, however, at hospitals, which often rely on backup generators. We have more updates for you. Please don't go away.
It's time to sing!
It's time to eat!
Hindi nga, it's time to sing na nga.
Hindi, it's time to eat!
Kantahan nga ito eh, kantahan to.
Kainan to!
O sige, ganito na lang. Para magkasundo tayo. It's singing time! It's singing time! Mula Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 8 hanggang alas 9 ng gabi. Dito lang sa Net 25.
Events happen around us all the time. In our community, in our country, around the world. Events that affect people, move communities, or simply inspire us. Interesting events that people need to know. In these interesting times, we continue to be a competent partner in delivering news about these events. Fast, accurate, balanced, eagle news, because we live in interesting times.
Air travel between Qatar and Saudi Arabia resumed today, according to the country's airlines, a major landmark as Doha's former rivals normalized ties under a landmark agreement. Saudi Arabia and its allies, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, in June 2017 slapped a blockade on Qatar that included closing airspace to the country over claims it backed Islamist groups and was too close to Iran. Qatar always denied the charges. The quartet agreed to lift the restrictions at a Gulf Cooperation Council summit last week in the Saudi desert of Al Ula after energetic diplomacy by outgoing U.S. President Donald Trump's administration. The first commercial flight between Qatar and Saudi in 3.5 years, a Qatar Airways service to Riyadh will take off from Doha, or it already took off from Doha at 10:45 GMT. Touchdown, 12:10 GMT, according to the airline's timetable. Saudi Airlines will fly from Riyadh to Doha, departing the kingdom at 13:14 GMT, according to its online schedule, with services from Jeddah expected to start at a later date. The New York Times had reported that Qatar has been paying in excess of $100 million annually just to use Iran's airspace to bypass Saudi Arabia.
The big tech show will go on, but only online. The 2021 Consumer Electronics Show kicks off, aiming to create connections and showcase the latest in robotics, smart devices, digital health, and more. Some 1,800 exhibitors will be participating in the show, forced to go online only by the coronavirus pandemic. The new format will be a challenge for one of the world's largest trade events. In previous years, the Las Vegas Extravaganza pulled in more than 4,000 exhibitors from startups to big multinationals, with upwards of 175,000 attendees. The event opens with a media day, normally packed with press conferences in Las Vegas ballrooms, replaced with streamed video presentations from companies such as Hisense, LG, Samsung, and Sony. The Consumer Technology Association, the trade group producing the event, will also unveil its forecast and trends for 2021. Gary Shapiro, president and chief executive of the group, said the first all-digital show would be showcasing the latest trends and innovation in artificial intelligence, 5G, digital health, smart cities, vehicle tech, and beyond. Digital CES is relying on artificial intelligence to match interests indicated in attendee profiles with exhibitors, hoping to put a software spin on the serendipity of stumbling upon cool products on show floors. Software will recommend people for exhibitors to connect with and provide tools for online meetings or chats. CES has more than 300 speakers lined up, and a heightened focus on sessions diving into issues such as privacy and 5G internet. Sessions will be immediately available for replay on demand and will remain accessible until mid-February, according to CES organizers.
In other news, young adults dressed to the nines and kimonos gathered in the city of Kawasaki to celebrate reaching the age of majority, although many of the usually jubilant events were canceled over coronavirus fears. The traditional coming-of-age day ceremony in Japan was held this year with socially distanced seating, hand disinfection, temperature tests at the entrance, and the arena's capacity was reduced by half. Take a look.
いろいろ感染リスクとかあるとは思うんですけど、一緒に一度のことなので、ちょっと久しぶりに会いたい友達もたくさんいるしとか思って今日は来ることにしました。
もやはり一生に一度の成人式ということで我々としては感染症対策ばっちり取りますのでお越しいただけるでしたらお越しいただきたいというふうに考えて開催したんですが合わせてオンライン配信も行っていますのでやはりご心配な方とかはお家でオンライン見ていただくという選択肢もご用意いたしました。今回事前に必ず登録をスマホとかで登録をしていただいてご自身の電話番号とかメールアドレスの方をご登録いただいております。それによってこちらの方でどなたが参加したかがきちんと把握できてさらに連絡することができますのでもし万が一中で感染症の方が発生した場合には皆様にご連絡等もできるようになっております。
More than 1 million people in Japan turned 20 this year. The second Monday of January is Coming of Age Day, a national holiday to encourage those who have newly entered adulthood to become self-reliant members of society. Municipal governments host special coming-of-age ceremonies for 20-year-olds since an adult in Japan is legally identified as one who is 20 or over. A record surge in COVID cases and a month-long virus state of emergency declared in and around Tokyo has led many local authorities to scrap or postpone the 2021 festivities. Kawasaki and neighboring Yokohama are included in the state of emergency, which is less strict than the harsh lockdowns seen in other countries. At Yokohama Arena, women in ornate kimonos, fluffy white stoles, and masks sat in socially distanced seating for the ceremony, with the men dressed mainly in suits. The arena's capacity was limited to 5,000, with 4 separate ceremonies held on Monday. Participants were told to keep their distance and speak quietly to avoid spreading the respiratory disease. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has urged young people earlier to follow the emergency measures, which ask residents to avoid non-essential outings and request restaurants and bars to close early last week. He also said that more than half of recent new infections in Greater Tokyo were among the under 30s. The fishing city of Yaizu in central Japan held a drive-in coming-of-age event on Sunday, drawing some 470 vehicles to the harbor side celebration. Tama in western Tokyo held an online ceremony for residents entering adulthood.
Finally, in our news, former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger appealed for unity on Sunday after the violent attack on the U.S. Capitol, which he described as an attempted coup by President Donald Trump, drawing comparisons to Nazi Germany. In a video posted on Twitter that quickly went viral, the Hollywood star compared the attack by Trump supporters to Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, when Nazis carried out pogroms in Germany in 1938 that included breaking the windows of Jewish-owned stores. Watch this.
As an immigrant to this country, I would like to say a few words to my fellow Americans and to our friends around the world about the events of recent days. Now, I grew up in Austria. I'm very aware of Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. It was a night of rampage against the Jews carried out in 1938 by the Nazi equivalent of the Proud Boys. Wednesday was the day of broken glass right here in the United States. The broken glass was in the windows of the United States Capitol. But the mob did not just shatter the windows of the Capitol. They shattered the ideals we took for granted. They did not just break down the doors of the building that housed American democracy, they trampled the very principles on which our country was founded. Now you see this sword? This is the Conan sword. Now here's the thing about swords. The more you temper a sword, the stronger it becomes. The more you pound it with a hammer and then heat it in the fire and then thrust it into the cold water and then pound it again and plunge it into the fire and into the water, the more often you do that, the stronger it becomes. I'm not telling you all this because I wanted to become an expert sword maker, but our democracy is like the steel of this sword. The more it is tempered, the stronger it becomes. Our democracy has been tempered by wars, injustices, and insurrections. I believe, as shaken as we are by the events of recent days, we will come out stronger because we now understand what can be lost. We need reforms, of course, so that this never ever happens again. We need to hold accountable the people that brought us to this unforgivable point. President Trump sought to overturn the results of an election, and of a fair election. He sought a coup by misleading people with lies. My father and our neighbors were misled also with lies, and I know where such lies lead. President Trump is a failed leader. He will go down in history as the worst president ever. The good thing is that he soon will be as irrelevant as an old tweet. And those who think they can overturn the United States Constitution know this: you will never win.
That is
In
actually,
short, you're terminated.
You're terminated. Yeah, that is actually a well-written speech. It's like we're watching a scene from a movie.
Yeah.
That's
I'm waiting
it
for a Wonder Woman
to appear. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. See you again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and
We live in interesting times.